I'm here with Robert Fisher at the CanAm 50th event at Gopher Dunes. Tell me a bit about your history with the CanAm project.
Well, I started number 2 employee after Gary Robinson and just before David. Dave and I came both in early 73, and we were right involved at the beginning. David worked more on I got him on the mini bike project, trying to get the mini bike that was sellable and made sense, but it turned out it didn't. And I started turning the R&D space they'd given us into a workshop to be able to make prototypes of the new motorcycle, which was yet unnamed. So we were there in this small shop for a year, and then we moved out to the main R&D center south of town, and had our own facility there and set it all up so that we could make prototypes of CanAms, and we ran the race team out of there. So I was first a project engineer. And then eventually, as time went on and Gary Robinson left, I became director of engineering.
Nice.
For about 3 years, I guess it was. And I left in May of '78. So in the meantime, I was responsible for getting the bike into production, along with the French-Canadian team that we had down there, which was a real good, strong team, because some of the guys were seconded from the snowmobile group, like Camille Picard and Paul Michaud, our engineer, and we had to, of course, make design parts, have them drawn up. Then somebody had to make the tooling for all those parts on the bike, so we make tooling for all of that, and then get a production line going up at the snowmobile plant when there was no snowmobiles being produced, I should say. And eventually, in spring of '73, we made our first run of 980 CanAms, 4 types, 125 TNT, 125 motocross bike, 175 and 175.
Nice.
So I was right there at the beginning with that job, and we had a team of 4 Canadians from outside of the Valcourt area, and about 4 or 5 Americans.
Nice.
Who came from California mainly.
So it started with an engine, though, correct? Was it the Rotax, or was it a brainchild on the whole thing?
Well, the engine was the primary driver, and Gary Robinson had spent all of 1970 working with Rotax and Dr. Lipich in getting a engine available for a dirt bike. So that was the first thing. So in the end, we had an engine with the unique feature was, of course, the rotary valve, two-stroke with a rotary valve that fit in relatively normal configuration, and only a 125 and 175 at that time. So when we got there, when I got there, we didn't have an engine, but shortly thereafter we had a sandcast version of that engine. I'm just pointing it because sandcast version of a 175, I think it was. And then we had the dynos all set up so that when we made our pipes up, they would match. We hoped they would match the output of the engines coming, what Rotax said they gave, and their dynos over there. So we had the dynos kind of matched up, and then we'd get straight. They'd send us a straight pipe, and the Toon Brothers, that's our guys there, they would bend the pipe to the right shape once we fitted into the bike and put a muffler on it, because we wanted to make sure that it did everything just as well with a muffler, because we can't build them without a muffler.
That's right, yeah.
So the little triangular shaped muffler was the first one we came up with, which fit between the rear suspension and the frame right in there, and it gave it kind of an unusual sound, but it was quiet. Didn't have a spark arrestor, so that later on that caused a problem. But the engine was genesis of the whole thing. And Rotax had been given the job of making an engine that was competitive in the world of two-stroke off-road bikes. And they did. They did a better job probably than we did with the frame, the chassis, the rest of the chassis. But that engine turned out to be still being used. I mean, the same basic engine. That didn't change substantially. There was, we had gearbox problems at the beginning, and we had little things that they had to work out, but they got them solved quite quickly. And then in the end, we had 125, 175, and then eventually, a little bit later, at the end of the year, 250 engines that were 6-speed, bulletproof, didn't break engines.
Nice. And then what about the frame was unique back in the day? Was it that CanAm did? Because they seem to be a different shape when you look at other bikes. They seem to be more of a compact presentation than, say, what the Yamahas and the Suzukis of the world were doing back then.
Well, we kind of took, one thing we stole was the backbone frame. That was unusual in that we liked the AGS frame. We had all these bikes that we bought to try out and make sure they worked. And the backbone frame was a good idea because, one, it was a great oil tank. Two, it was strong. It was easy to make. It was just two halves stamped out and welded together, and then welded to the head tube, and then all the rest of the tubes were as needed to have normal geometry. We started out with a frame with slightly smaller tubing, but then went to that tubing we have that's on them, that was for many years. And the frame, I don't think it was unusual in its shape, other than maybe the backbone, and we weren't completely unusual because AJS had made a frame, not the same shape, but a similar concept. So the frame has turned out working well. The swing arm, of course, had to be modified as we went down the road with shock absorber position. The airbox was always a problem to make an airbox that didn't leak and let water and dirt in and hold an air filter. But it was interesting. If you look at that bike, most people don't know this. This bike has an airbox under here.
Right.
Okay, and that air comes in here. People
Oh,
don't realize that. And
neat.
it's basically sealed around the edge
Yeah.
at the top. And we did the dyno tests with the bike, with the seat and the airbox, everything in place, so that the numbers, 24 horsepower for the 175, was with an air filter, with an airbox that was all sealed up, and the air coming in from the back, which was as far away from the dirt as you could possibly get it, and from water.
Nice.
That people don't kind of realize that how important this is.
Very cool.
And you can't take away that space, like drop your seat down, or it has to be there. But
Wow.
we tested it that way and that's one of the reasons why it worked good as an enduro bike, because it could go in very deep water before it actually
Yeah, you'd
took
have to
in
be
water.
over that fender.
Yeah, you had to be quite deep.
Yeah. Nice.
So that was anyway, it has just that evolution of parts. It gradually got better and better and better, and then we started getting longer suspension and Marzocchi forks instead of Baytor forks, and
Yep, sweet. And how did you as an engineer get involved in CanAm? How'd they find you?
Gary Robinson,
Yeah.
who was in charge of it, phoned me one day. I was in Oakville working for my dad, and he said, "I understand you're an engineer who just won some championships, and you might be interested in coming to Quebec and building an off-road dirt bike." Took me 10 seconds to say, I'll come down and interview. So I went down to Valcourt and met Gary, and he offered me a job, $12,000 a year, which at that time was way more than I was making.
Nice.
It wasn't enormous, but it was in 1971 was good money.
Yeah.
And so I stayed from 71 to 78. And as I said, I went from project engineer to director of engineering.
That's great.
It was just an interesting. It was a wonderful job. I loved it.
That's a dream job. What kind of accolades have you had in the racing world? You mentioned racing as part of your heritage.
Oh yeah, well when I started, I raced all kinds of odd bikes. Finally, kind of hooked up with Husqvarna. I won the 250 Ontario Championship in '69, and I almost won a lot of races. And I started riding 250 and 400 at the same time in '69, '70. That was the end of that. And then I went to Quebec. Well, then after that, we rode test bikes all the time, pretty much. So then I started riding enduros, and then I rode 6 days. I rode 6 international 6 days in Spain, Massachusetts, Isle of Man, Italy, Austria, and Czechoslovakia. And got 1 gold, 2 silver, 2 bronze, and 1 DNF when my back wheel, this wheel, not that wheel, my back wheel broke in Italy. I was using my magnesium hub, and I had the spokes probably too tight. Came down a mountain, cools off. I put some more strain on the spokes, and in the morning when it was cold, when we started up, I just went to leave the Parc Fermé, and the hub went boom, and the bike just dropped down at the back. And that was Thursday. That was the end of my Italy endeavor. They were called 6 days, and that was 74. I think it was Alaman, 74. They were our first TNTs, like that, looked like that with the headlight.
Yeah.
And they were all the ones I rode were 175s, except in Czechoslovakia I rode a 250, which was the best. It was an OR, orange red bike. It had the 250. That was the best bike I had.
Do you have any stories of engineering and development on these things, like really good brakes that didn't make the cut?
Brakes. Here you go. Okay, here's my brake story. I don't know why we went with drum brakes, except that was the standard. We should have thought ahead and developed a bike with disc brakes, because obviously that's what came along. But here's one little story. We were having trouble getting at a good price the cast iron ring that goes inside, that cast in the hub. You cast an aluminum hub around a steel brake drum.
Right.
The ring, it's an inch by 6 inches. And we were having trouble getting that material in Quebec at that time. So we thought, you know what? We can buy 6-inch pipe, tubular pipe made of rotocast iron. That'll save some money. It'll be easy to get. You just cut it up in 1-inch sections. So we bought this couple of lengths of tubing to try it out, 20-foot lengths of tubing, and made up cast. Got that cast into the hub because we had the tooling for the new hubs. Cast it all, put it together, tried it on our bikes. And it didn't work because it turns out that rotocast iron has a coefficient closer to butter than normal cast iron. So it was a complete disaster. We had to throw away whatever 20 or 30 hubs we'd made to try it out, like for testing, and go back to finding normal, just straight cast iron, and putting that in, which had a much higher coefficient of friction. And we didn't know that, or we just forgot to check on it. And so there was a brake story that didn't work.
Wow,
and we
that's
ended up
crazy.
with the hubs that we used the whole time, which were never particularly good brakes. But back in the day, they were the standard.
Right. So what do you think about the electric entry for CanAm, the rebirth of the motorcycle, so to speak, down the pipe?
Well, I guess all I can say is I guess that's the way we're heading in a lot of different toys, like
Absolutely.
bikes or snowmobiles, whatever. I think in some venues those electric bikes will work good. I mean, if it's a short enough race or a short enough enduro, or where they can fit the range into the length of the race, I don't see why it wouldn't work. I mean, the power delivery of an electric motor is linear, and you get what you get. And I don't think they can afford to make them any heavier than a regular IC bike, but
That's
I
right.
think there's a future for them, and then eventually I'm sure there'll be classes specifically set up for electric motorcycles, dirt
Yeah.
bike classes and other classes.
Well, I appreciate your time today, Fish. Thank you so much for all the information you've given me. And I'm going to grab a picture with this guy too before we go.